All right. So hello, everyone, and welcome to day 2. Ready to pickle and jam over a 2-day mini series, Let's Preserve. So for those joining us for the first time, welcome. And for those that joined us yesterday for day 1, welcome back. We have an action-packed session for you today filled with more preservation recipes and know-hows. My name is Rose, and I am the Education and Training Manager at Second Harvest. And today we have with us Jade Guthrie from FoodShare to share with us 2 amazing recipes. She will share with us her spicy peach jam and her garlic dill pickle recipes. Super delicious, looking forward to it. If you're new to canning, no worries, we got you. This event will unpack the most common pitfalls any beginners and even experts have when canning so that you can enjoy the harvest all year long. Jade will help us build our skills so that hopefully by the end of the event, we'll have you being super excited to can. So we would like to thank first and foremost Whole Foods Market for helping us make this mini series possible. Thank you very much. Whole Foods Market seeks out the finest natural and organic foods available. They maintain the strictest quality standards in the industry, and they are committed to sustainable agriculture. Not only that, reducing and recovering food waste are central to their mission of nourishing people, animals, and the planet. They upcycle food in their stores and champions food rescue programs. So thank you so much, Whole Foods Market, for making this event possible. Our mini series is also part of this month's Donate the Difference campaign at Second Harvest. So all throughout August, we are sharing handy tips for the kitchen and grocery aisles that help people both reduce their food waste and save them money. So we invite you to live waste-wise, reduce your food budget, and hopefully donate the difference to support Second Harvest's mission of no waste, no hunger. So if you would like to be part of our campaign, please head to donatethedifference.ca to learn more great food waste prevention tips and find out how you can help rescue and deliver good food to Canadians across our country. Every $1 donated to Second Harvest allows us to provide enough food for 2 meals for a family or emergency in need. So thank you so much in advance for your support. We have an exciting evening ahead of us, so let's get started. To begin, I would love to start with a land acknowledgement. So while we meet today on a virtual platform, we would like to take a moment to acknowledge the Indigenous peoples of all of the lands that we are currently on today. And we do this to reaffirm our commitment and our responsibility in improving relationships between nations and improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. From coast to coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this nation home. So please join me in acknowledging the harms and mistakes of the past and consider how we can, in our own very special way, try to move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. I do want to share that Jade is from FoodShare and she's located in Toronto. So if you are in Toronto and would love to know a little bit more about Indigenous and a land acknowledgement specifically for Toronto, I'm going to head a link in the chat for you to have a look. Hopefully by the end of this event, definitely worth a check out. So it's in the chat, my friends, and I hope you have a look at it very soon. So for those who are not familiar with Second Harvest, we are Canada's largest food rescue organization, and we are an expert in perishable food recovery. Our dual mission is no waste, no hunger, and it's our commitment to the planet that is both environmental and community focused. We have a 36-year history of rescuing unsold surplus food from across the supply chain and redirecting that food to charities and non-for-profits to serve their in-need communities. We're very, very honored and lucky to serve our communities. So a few housekeeping rules before we get started. And the first one is the session is being recorded and we can share with you the recording after the workshop. So currently your video is off and you are muted, my friends, but we welcome any input you might have. So in the chat, let me know if you have any comments, concerns, questions. I want to know about it. I'll be monitoring that chat today and providing some guidance. So before we get started, I would love for you to take a few seconds to answer the first poll of today's event. Take a few seconds for me, my friends, to answer the first poll. Oh, I am so sorry. Let me give you the correct poll. There you go. There you go. Please take a few seconds to complete that poll. Thank you very much. Few more seconds. No worries, Melissa. We got you, my friend. We will be sharing that recording from day one as well. So look out for an email from us soon, very, very soon. Nice. All right, I'll end that poll. And let's do it. All right, so let's recap quickly what happened in day one. So in day one yesterday, we learned that food loss and waste is a huge issue in Canada. We learned that 58% of all of the food that is produced in Canada is lost or wasted every single year in our country. That amounts to 35.5 million metric tons, or the weight of 350,000 blue whales. We also learned that 32% of that waste is perfectly good food. It's good that you and I would go to the grocery store, be completely happy to buy. That equates to about 11.2 million metric tons and the weight of 90 CN towers. Holy crap, we're wasting a lot of good food. So last night we had gastronaut, cookbook author, artist, 8-time Guinness World Record holder, Mr. Bob Bloomer, share with us some amazing preservation recipes. He took second bin and bruising fruits to make simple and delicious popsicles, refrigerated jams, just in time for the harvest. He also showed us how to pickle lettuce and carrots using leftover brine. Who knew you could do that? Apparently you can. And he showed us how it was done yesterday, super easy. If that wasn't cool enough, he made for us zero waste pesto and showed us how easy it was to portion and freeze it for future dishes. It was a great night filled with fun and engaging strategies to reduce our food waste for sure. So if you missed day one, no worries, we got ya. We will be sending out a link to the recording along with his recipes. So stay tuned for an email from us with all of that good information. Amazing. Okay. Sweet. Alrighty, folks, we have 2 delicious recipes to uncover today. So I would love to introduce you to Jade Guthrie. She is the Community Kitchen Facilitator at FoodShare, a Toronto-based food justice organization, a fantastic organization. So if you have a moment, I would recommend that you check them out. She explores cooking, preserving, eating, learning with various people in her community and her network. Jade develops and facilitates workshops with a few things in mind. Opening up leadership opportunities is one of them, exchanging food knowledge, and creating connections. Her background is in social work. Brings in an anti-oppressive critical lens to the work that she does around food, with a focus on engaging with food justice and sovereignty movements in meaningful ways. So she is a pickler and jammer extraordinaire and a friend of Second Harvest. So we are super excited to have her. So welcome, Jade. I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing my screen, my friend, and I'll pass it over to you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Rose. Hi, everyone. Rose, can you hear me? Everything's good? Yes? Is that it? Yeah, awesome.
Yes.
Cool. All right, cool. Hi, everyone. It's so nice to be here with you all. My name is Jade. My pronouns are she and her. I'm super stoked to be here to share this space with you all and to chat a little bit about pickling and jamming, which is one of my favorite things to do in the world. So this is quite a joy for me to spend my Wednesday evening like this with all of you from across the world, which is amazing. So we're going to be making 2 recipes, as Rose mentioned. I'm basically going to be running you through the entire canning process, talk a little bit about the science behind canning, some kind of tips and tricks. Canning is pretty complex. You know, it's really accessible. I encourage everyone to try it out, but it does have a lot of steps and there's a lot of things to kind of know about it. So there is going to be a lot of information over the next hour. Don't worry, I will be sending out a nice little infographic with everything recapped. So if you miss something, don't stress, you're going to get it later on. And you can always look back to this recording, I guess, too. So like Rose said, we're going to be making 2 recipes. The first is going to be a pickle recipe. We're going to be making some garlicky dill pickles, which are my personal favorite kind of pickles. And then we're also going to be making a spiced peach jam. I picked that recipe because right now here in Ontario, where I am, it's peach season, and we are known for our peaches here in Ontario. I might be biased, but I think Niagara has some of the best peaches in the world. So I'm super excited to preserve those peaches and be able to enjoy those in, 6 months down the road, thanks to the lovely canning process. So the type of canning we're going to be doing today is hot water bath canning. So there's kind of 2 different types of canning you can do. One is hot water bath, which we're going to kind of explore in depth today. And then there's also pressure canning. The difference between these 2 is the types of foods that you're going to be canning with each of them. So with hot water bath canning, you need to be canning high acid foods or low pH level. So low pH level is a high acid, and then a high pH level means low acid. So with hot water bath canning, we need to be focusing on high acid foods because that's the amount of bacteria that the hot water canning process can actually kill. If you want to be processing low acid foods, you need to be doing pressure canning, which is a totally different process. So we're not going to be talking about that today, but you could do your own Googling if you're interested in that. What a high acid food is something like a pickle, anything that tastes acidic, also something like a jam because there's lemon juice in there. A lot of fruits are naturally high acid as well, and then jellies too. There's a couple other ones as well, but we're going to kind of focus on those today. Low acid food examples would be like meats, vegetables that aren't going to be pickled, that kind of stuff, where you need to actually add acid to it to make it a high acid food. So I'm going to walk you through just some of the equipment we're going to be using before we kind of jump right into the recipe. So if you are going to be canning, one of the most important things you're going to need is your little canning kit here. I don't know which camera I should show it to here. Maybe I'll show it here. All right, so this is my canning kit. You don't have to get this particular brand. This is just what I had. It's got a lot of really important tools in here. These are pretty affordable. You can get them for 10, 15 bucks, depending on where you're getting it. If you are going to be, diving into canning at home, I highly suggest grabbing one of these. I'll walk you through some of the equipment we're going to be using from that set. The first one is these jar lifters. They look kind of like these weird tongs that are really wide, and you'll see they have a nice plastic coating or rubber coating rather on the end here, and that helps them be really grippy for when we're lifting our jars in and out of the canner. These serve a couple purposes. Obviously, if we're lifting and putting jars into a hot water bath, you don't want to be sticking your hands in there and burning yourself. So that's purpose number 1. Number 2 is that by using these jar lifters, we're avoiding any kind of cross-contamination when we're touching the jars. So these are super, super crucial. If you don't have a canning kit and you don't feel like grabbing one, you could kind of DIY these by grabbing regular tongs and coating them in elastic bands or something to kind of make them a bit more grippy. But I do suggest grabbing these because they're shaped exactly like the lid or the mouth of a jar, which is kind of perfect for what we're doing. Secondly, we have got our little bubble remover tool. It just kind of looks like a long flat utensil. This is, as you can probably guess, used to remove bubbles from our jars once we filled them with our recipe. Air bubbles can kind of impede the formation of a seal when we are canning. So it's important that we're getting rid of them. If you don't have one of these, you can definitely just use like another long flat utensil, something like a chopstick works really well. Otherwise, you can also just kind of like tap your jar on the counter, and that usually will get rid of air bubbles as well. Next, I've got a nice little funnel here. As you can see, it's got a really wide mouth, so it's a bit different than a regular kitchen funnel. This is what we use to fill our jars to avoid some mess when we're filling our jars. It's like sized perfectly for the mouth of these mason jars, which is great. I've also got a little lid lifter here. So this is just another long plastic tool with a magnet at the end here. And so we use this to lift the lids out of like a hot water bath or a bowl, wherever they're sitting, once they've been sterilized. If you can't kind of tell already, canning is like the whole process. We're just trying to avoid any kind of cross-contamination the whole time. That's one of the most important things, is that we're just like doing everything we can to avoid any extra bacteria going into our jars. So that means once we've sterilized our jars, not touching the mouths of it, not touching the lids, not touching anything that's going to be in contact with the actual food, right? So having these little like magnetic tools and these tongs are really helpful to really kind of make sure that we're not cross-contaminating. Finally, we've got, oh, actually not finally, I've got two more things to show you. Super important is my rack here. So this is a canning rack. They don't all look like this. They all look really different, to be honest. This is one I took out of like a pressure cooker that I have. Basically, the purpose of a rack is just to lift the jars off of the bottom of your pot. So if you're putting like glass jars at the bottom of a pot and then you turn the stove on and it gets really hot, there is potential for it to crack from the heat, right? So we want to avoid that at all costs and preserve our beautiful recipes that are in those jars. So by lifting it off with a rack, we can avoid any kind of like explosion of glass in our canner. So I've got a rack here. They also often kind of look just like a wire baking rack almost. If you don't have a rack, like you don't buy a canner, you could also just use a baking rack that fits in the bottom of your pot. Other options for like DIY are kind of just like making some ropes of tin foil and wrapping them together into like a little kind of spider web that fits into the bottom of your pot. Or another great one is actually taking these like rims of the jars and attaching them together with paper clips and setting those at the bottom of your pot as well. So all of these serve the same purpose of just ensuring that our jars are lifted off of the bottom of our pot. All right. So the last thing I'm going to show you is my actual canning vessel. So I'm in my house, if you can't tell, and I don't have like an actual canner here at my home. But what I'm going to be using is just this really, let me grab this, really big pot. So if you don't want to like invest in a hot water canner right away, because maybe you're just starting to get into canning, they can be a bit more expensive. You can just use any like big, deep pot you have at home, as long as it has a tight fitting lid. So I'm just using this like regular KitchenAid pot that I'm going to be using for my canning process. The important part is making sure that whatever rack you have is going to fit into your pot. So just pay attention to that if you are kind of making a rack or purchasing one. Alrighty, I'm just gonna, Rose, is there anything in the chat? Sorry, I can't see the chat.
No worries, babe. No, nothing yet. Just,
cool.
Yeah. Anne said it looks great. Yeah, she's in love with your canning kit as I am. So we're looking forward to you using it.
Awesome, cool. Okay, perfect. So I'm just gonna walk you through what I've done kind of before the session, because we can't do everything on camera today just because we only have an hour. So I've done a couple of the steps ahead of time just so we can get into the good like meaty parts of canning together. So I've actually gone ahead and sterilized my jars ahead of time. So I don't know if you've noticed, but I haven't been like touching my jars on the top because they're already sterilized. So the steps for doing that are just, grabbing whatever mason jars you're using, checking them for any kind of cracks or nicks that might be kind of in and around there. Especially if you're reusing older jars, you need to double check for any kind of imperfections there. Wash them with warm soapy water, give them a rinse. And then what you're going to do is throw them right into your hot water canner on a rack. Basically, so let me actually just bring you over here. Here, I'll show you with a different jar that is not sterilized, just so you can kind of get the idea. Throw my rack in there, get that at the bottom. And then, let's say I was using this jar and I wanted to sterilize it. I've washed it with soap and water. And then you're just gonna go ahead and fill it with some water to weigh it down when we put it into our canner. And then you would just place it right in there on top of your rack. And then you're gonna go ahead and pour in more water just to cover this jar by about 1 inch. And then lid on and bring it to a boil. Once this is at a boil, you let it simmer for 10 minutes. 10 minutes, turn the heat off, our jars are sterilized. You can then remove them with your jar lifters. Oops. Right, so you would grab this, the mouth of the jar here with your lifters. You can empty the water back in your canner here. And then you would go ahead and set this sterilized jar onto a wooden cutting board or any kind of like heat resistant surface. And you're just gonna let that chill. I see a question, can you do more than 1 jar at a time? Absolutely, that's a really massive jar that I had lying around. I sterilized all 6 of my jars at the same time when I was preparing for this session. So absolutely, you can do more than 1.
I also have a question here, Jade. Could they use the dishwasher?
Yes, so you can also use a dishwasher or you can sterilize them in the oven as well. Those methods, maybe I can send some links out with some kind of detailed descriptions there. There's also some folks who don't sterilize jars depending on how long you are processing your actual recipe for. So if you're processing your recipe for a longer time, sometimes you don't need to sterilize the jars ahead of time because the bacteria would get killed during the hot water bath, like processing of the recipe. But just to be safe, I do like to sterilize all my jars beforehand because when I'm canning at home, I just like to be 100% sure there's no cross-contamination. But I can absolutely send those links out because there are a couple different methods of sterilizing jars, and it can kind of help you multitask sometimes if you've got a dishwasher. I don't personally, unfortunately. All right, so that is the sterilizing process. So all these jars that you see here on my little counter are already sterilized. So now that they're sterilized, I'm not going to touch them at the top at all. I'll only be handling them from the bottoms here. And I actually just finished sterilizing them before I logged on, so the jars are still warm. You want to make sure that your jars are kind of keeping warm during your canning process, because if you take like a really hot jam and put it into a really cold jar, that can also cause it to crack, right? So you can even leave your jars in the hot water bath until you're ready to fill them if you want to do that. Because we're not going to be too long, I'm cool with just letting them sit on my counter for now. All right, everyone good with the sterilizing process? Feel free to ask any questions in the chat. I will move on to getting our pickles started, but can answer any questions as we go. So pickles. One of the most important parts of the pickles is the brine. So that's like the liquid that the pickle is sitting in that actually makes the pickle, right? So that's the like vinegary tasting water that's in our pickle jars that sometimes people will like use for other things too. You can use them like sauces, and I think it's really tasty. Depends on who you are, I guess. But there is a basic kind of ratio that you need to be sticking to when you're making any pickle brine, and that's a 50-50 ratio. So that means you need 50% water and 50% vinegar for any pickle brine that you're making. One thing I will mention is that ratios in canning is really, really important. So like I mentioned earlier, we can only can high acid foods with a hot water canning process. That's because the hot water canning process kills off certain bacteria and microorganisms that can form in the jars, but it can only do that if it's a high acid food that's already preventing those bacteria from growing, right? So if we mess up the ratios in a recipe, if we don't add enough vinegar or enough acidity, those bacteria would kind of have the perfect environment to grow in, right? So we need to be making sure that we're following recipes kind of by the book when we're canning. I know when we cook, sometimes we'll be like, add a little bit of this, add a little bit of that, or like, you know, based on taste, which is really awesome and like definitely my favorite way to cook. But when we're canning, we need to make sure that with things like vinegar, lemon juice, sugar, that we're really kind of sticking to the recipe that we're following that's been tested and tried and proven to be safe, because we really want to avoid anything like botulism or any kind of other bacteria that could show up as a result of like a lower acidity level. So 50-50 is kind of like the minimum requirement for a brine. So what I'm going to do is in my pot here, I'm going to add 50% water, 50% vinegar. You want to be using vinegar that's like at least 5% acetic level. I've got a mix here of apple cider vinegar and just like a regular white vinegar. Both of them are 5%. You could also use something like a champagne vinegar here if you're like fancy, or you know, any other kind of like 5% lighter vinegar would work here as well. But those are, I'm going to use those two because I like the taste of apple cider vinegar personally, but I like the kind of strength of the white vinegar as well. So I've mixed them up to make equal 2 cups here. And then I'm going to go ahead and add in just 2 cups of water as well. Okay, so I've got those in my pot. Next, the last thing I'm adding to my brine here, brine is super simple, is just some pickling salt. So pickling salt is different than regular salt because it's not iodized. So you could also be using like a kosher sea salt, as long as that's not iodized as well. The purpose of using non-iodized salt is to avoid any kind of cloudiness that shows up in a brine as a result of the iodization process. So like if you did use a salt that was iodized, it wouldn't cause your pickles to be unsafe to eat. They would just not look as nice. So using kosher salt or pickling salt is kind of like the standard here. So I'm going to be adding a tablespoon of this salt into my pot here with my 2 vinegars. Okay. Alrighty. And then I'm just going to go ahead and bring this over to my stove and bring it up to a boil while we kind of work on packing our jar here. Once this hits a boil, you're going to turn it off. You want the salt to be dissolved, obviously, but you don't need to like continue boiling it once it hits that boil and the salt is dissolved. Just needs to be hot. So I'm going to bring this over the stove. It's going to be out of sight for now. Alrighty. So now that that's going, we are going to pack our jar for our pickles. So for the sake of time, I'm only going to be doing 1 jar of pickles. I will probably do a bunch later on after I log off. But because I want to make sure we get through both recipes, I'm just going to show you how to pack the one. When you would make this, usually you'd be using like 2 pounds of pickles or cucumbers rather, and you'd have like some really big jars of pickles coming out and you'd have a bunch of them. Today, I'm just doing like a small batch for the sake of demonstration. Alrighty. So, and I see someone in the chat talking about weight. Yeah, weight is super important as well when we're canning. A kitchen scale is a really great friend when we're canning. I'll talk about that a little bit when we're making our jam. If you have a kitchen scale, it's really, really helpful, especially when you're making something with like ratios. So thank you, Janice, for mentioning that. I appreciate it. Awesome. So I've got my jar here, which I mentioned is already sterilized. So what we're going to do first is add our spices into the jar. So I know that I said you can't play around with recipes when you're canning. It's not 100% true. You cannot play around with things like vinegar and water and sugar and lemon juice because those do directly affect acidity levels. Something like spices, though, do not have an impact on acidity levels. So you do have like a little bit of wiggle room when you're canning to maybe throw in like an extra cinnamon stick if you love cinnamon, or omit the cinnamon if you hate cinnamon. So this specific pickle recipe that I'm going to be showing you is like based on my own personal preferences and tastes. You can definitely find other ones online or in recipe books that might have like a different combination of spices or seasonings that are more up your alley if you're not into this. So I'm going to use some fresh dill here. I've got like 3 stems of it that I'll throw right into my jar here. And again, making sure that we're not touching the mouth of the jar when we're packing it with our spices. And so if you were making like 10 jars of pickles right now, you would be packing the spices into each jar separately. We do that instead of adding them into the brine, just to make sure that they're evenly distributed among the jars and that each jar of pickles gets the proper amount of flavor and taste that we want it to. So I've got my dill in there. I'm gonna go ahead and throw some garlic in as well. So I've already peeled my cloves. I'm just gonna give it like a little bit of a crush and throw it right in. Okay. Next, we'll move on to some spices. So I'm going to do a little bit of red pepper flakes here. So I'm going to do about a 1/4 teaspoon. These, again, you don't have to throw in there if you aren't super into heat. Totally not a requirement. I'm going to throw in some black peppercorns as well. I'm going to do about 6 of those. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right, we've got 6 black peppercorns. Next, let's see what else we've got in my little spice bag here. I'm gonna throw in a bay leaf. I'm just gonna do like one that's kind of broken in half. So like half a bay leaf really in here. You could do a whole one if you wanted. All right, some mustard seeds. This I'm just gonna do like a very small amount because they are pretty like strong tasting. So maybe like about that much. Like it's pretty tiny. Throw those in there. Also gonna add in some coriander seeds as well. And these I'll probably do maybe 6 to match the peppercorns. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now I'm going to add some cloves. So I've got some whole cloves here. You can also sometimes get just like a pre-mixed pickling spice pack that you could use if you don't want to like buy each of these spices separately if you don't already have them. Those can be really helpful. They come already in like dill pickle spice and it's like already mixed together, so that can be nice. I'm just gonna add in 3 whole cloves in here. It's starting to smell very good. Alrighty. Okay, so I'm going to quickly check on my brine here, see where we're at. Looking like I need to turn my heat up a little bit, so I'll do that. Just stir. All right, back to my jar. So as you can see, we've got it filled with all of our beautiful spices and seasonings here that will add all our flavor to our pickles. Next, we're actually going to put our cucumbers into the jar. So I'm using pickling cucumbers, which are a bit different than a regular cucumber. They're smaller and have a bit of a different skin. You could use other cucumbers if you can't find pickling cucumbers. It might have like a little bit of a different texture. Totally up to you though, and based on like what you're able to access really in the time of the year. I saw a question in the chat around preparing the veggies. So all I've done is I've gone ahead and kind of scrubbed these, washed them under warm water, and then I've gone ahead and cut them into these kind of like half spears. I cut them this way because they would fit into my jar best this way. You could just like throw them in whole if you are using like a bigger jar where they'll fit, and also depending on like how you like your cucumber pickles personally. I like to put mine on like the side of a salad or something, so this shape works for me. But what we're gonna do now that these are nice and washed and they're clean and ready to go is we're just gonna throw them right into our jar with our spices. And you wanna kind of pack them in as much as you can here. Rose, did you unmute?
Yeah, I just have a question, my friend. Could they, like what kind of pickles are you using and can they use sometimes with gardening? Sometimes the pickles are a little bit like later in life, like they're seeding, could they use that to pickle as well?
Sorry, can you ask that again? I think you cut out for a
Yeah,
second.
for sure. So in when you're gardening with pickles and you didn't grab the cucumber in time, and they'll turn like really big, and there's a lot of seed in them because they're now seeded. Could they still pickle that, you think, or do we have to always kind of lean towards like younger cucumbers?
So I think it would still work. The texture, I think, might be
Mm,
changed a little bit. I don't think there would be any like safety concerns in terms of like it altering the acidity by any means, but I
yeah,
would, depending on the texture of like what you're looking for in a pickle, the like crunchiness, the seeds might kind of interfere with that a little bit. But I think, like I'm sure they would taste good no matter what.
yeah,
So I
absolutely.
would say go for it.
And what are your thoughts about seeds in pickles and without seeds in pickles?
What do you mean?
So do you find that there's a taste difference if we remove the seeds in cucumbers before we pickle them, or not?
I've never removed the seeds just because I
Hmm.
find that I'm like lazy and it's an extra step. I like the seeds personally. I think maybe like in terms of taste and preferences, again, like if someone wanted to remove the seeds and take that extra step, again, it wouldn't affect the quality of your pickle, but it might change the texture or what it kind of looks like or how it tastes. As you can see, like my seeds are like, they're pretty seedy. So if I were to remove these seeds, like I wouldn't have a ton of cucumber left, to be honest.
I see. Cool, Jay. This is awesome. And could you cut them in like circles instead of big chunks like you're
Yeah,
doing right now? Okay.
for sure. When I do like a bread and butter pickle, I love to cut them into like circle, like coins.
Mm,
Um, for dill pickles, like I'll eat them just alone. So I like to do bigger chunks. But you could definitely just do a coin for these as well.
there you go, folks. Lots of different ways for you to stuff the jar with cucumbers. Good stuff. Thanks, Jade.
No worries. Alrighty, so I'm packing my cucumbers in here, and you want to get in as many as you can. Use as much space up as you can. This looks like it's kind of maybe packed to the brim. I might cut one of these in half and kind of throw it in there at the top. One thing to keep in mind when you are doing any type of hot water canning is that you need to leave about a ½ inch of headspace at the top of the jar. So a ½ inch of space here where there's not going to be any food or liquid because that helps when we're trying to seal our jar in the hot water canner. So I could like fit an extra cucumber in here if I were just like putting them in the jar for fun. But because we're canning it and we need to make sure that it seals, I'm not going to add anything above there. All right, so let me check on my brine here. I think it should be ready to go. Okay, yes, so my brine just came to a boil. As you can see here, the salt is dissolved and it's nice and hot and steamy, so it's ready to go. All right, so what you're gonna do here is just grab a ladle, grab your funnel, and put your funnel into your jar over your cucumbers. Again, making sure that everything is like super sanitized, super cleaned throughout the whole process. So, like I washed my funnel beforehand, washed all my tools, washed my ladle. I'll wash my funnel again before I make my peach jam, obviously, because I don't want it to taste like pickles. But just making sure that so your whole counter space is really clean, that you're sanitizing it to, again, avoid any kind of cross-contamination. So I'm just going to give my brine a stir here and slowly pour it over my cucumbers. Alrighty. And again, leaving about a ½ inch of headspace at the top of your jar when you're pouring your brine in. And you want to make sure that all of your cucumbers are fully covered as well. Alrighty. So let's see how we're doing here. I think that's like a little bit too much. So I'm going to grab a spoon and just kind of take a little bit of brine out to make sure that we've got that ½ inch of space. Alrighty. Okay, that is looking pretty good to me. So you'll see there, got a nice amount of space. All of my cucumbers are covered by the liquid, looking great. Perfect. So our jar is packed and ready to go. Let's see. Can I move the camera a bit? Which way do you want me to move the camera? Rose, if you could tell me what the response is, that would be awesome.
You got it.
See the jar. Is this better? This is maybe like this camera. Anyway, this is what our jar is looking like. So we've got our cucumbers, all our spices in here, our brine covering our cucumbers, and then a 1/2 inch of headspace at the top. So I could use my bubble remover here. Because my cucumbers are quite packed in there, I'm not going to use the bubble remover. And instead, I'm just going to lightly tap my jar on the counter here to kind of get rid of any air bubbles that might be trapped underneath my cucumbers. So just like this. And you can kind of, you can't see it because you're not down here, but I can see little air bubbles kind of escaping up to the top when I do this. Alrighty. Perfect. So we've got rid of those bubbles. Next thing we're going to do is go ahead and cover up our jars with the lids. So the first thing you want to do is grab a clean sheet of paper towel or like a clean tea towel and just lightly wipe the mouth of your jar to get rid of any kind of liquid, or if you're using jam, to get rid of any like jam that's kind of spilled onto the mouth of the jar. We want to avoid any kind of like non-water particles on top of here because they can get in the way of that sealing process. So you're just going to give it a good wipe, making sure that it's clean. It can also cause it to rust if there's any kind of like food stuck in there. So we want to keep our jars super clean. Give it a good wipe. Next, we are going to use our handy little lid lifter here to lift one of my lids out of this bath. So what I've done with the lids beforehand, sorry, I forgot to mention this earlier, is I washed my lids with soapy water, gave them a rinse, threw them in a little saucepan, covered them with water, and again, simmered for 10 minutes. So basically the same process as sterilizing the jars. I just left them in here so they could stay warm and clean. And now I've used my lid lifter to grab one of these lids. And you're just going to place it center on top of your jar here. And then you can use your finger to touch the top of this lid because that's not going to touch the food, to center it perfectly. All right, so you can see here. And that's where our seal is going to form, is like around here where that elastic is under the lid. All right, then you can just grab one of these guys. Again, these we don't have to like boil or simmer for 10 minutes. These you just wash them with soapy warm water and then just let them kind of chill to the side until you're ready to use them. So you're just going to grab one of these and close up your jar. In terms of how tight you're looking for, you want it to be kind of like fingertip tight. So what that means is you don't want to be like cranking it so that it's really hard to open again. You just want it to be keeping that lid centered during the canning process. So the actual like this rim, you can take them off after the canning process if it's sealed properly, and the actual lid should just stay on by itself without that rim because that vacuum seal has formed underneath. So this beautiful jar of pickles is now ready to go into our canner. Does anyone have any questions before I process this?
Yeah, for sure. I had a couple of questions from folks. And the first one is there any particular way to wash or prep your veggies, or can they just rinse it using cold water?
Yeah, so just give them a good scrub. Again, you just want to be making sure you're getting rid of any kind of like dirt or bacteria that might be on there, because we want to, again, avoid any type of bacteria that could grow inside of our jars.
Gotcha. Oh, that's cool. And then can you give any examples, Jade, of when the sterilization process was not done properly? Like what are some telltale signs that sterilization was not completely achieved?
It's hard to say because there's a lot of things that can go wrong in canning. So like the things that at the end might indicate sterilization didn't go wrong, could also indicate that maybe like the processing part went wrong, or like there's a lot of stages at which things might have gotten a little bit messed up. But I can talk after we process our jars about a couple of things to look for that might be warning signs about sterilization or about processing or sealing or all of that stuff, if that helps in like a couple minutes.
Nice, absolutely.
Perfect. All right, am I good to throw this guy into our canner here? Yeah?
Yes, you are, my friend.
Awesome. All right, so I have got my pot here with my rack at the bottom. Rack is very important, remember, make sure that's in there. I've just left the water in here from when I sterilized my jars. It's helpful to leave all the water in there because it's nice and hot, so it takes longer to get back up to pressure that way. And then using my jar lifter here. So as you can see, I'm lifting it just under the mouth with our jar lifters. We're just gonna go ahead and put that guy right back in there. And like someone mentioned earlier, could totally be doing like 6 jars of pickles right now, but because for the sake of demonstration, we're just gonna be doing 1. So I'm gonna add a little bit more water in here because you wanna make sure that your water is covering your jar by an inch. So you're just gonna pour water in until it is fully submerged here. Perfect. All right. Gonna go ahead and throw our cover onto our pot and turn the heat on. So we're gonna turn on to a high heat. This is gonna help it get to a nice boil. Basically, the purpose of this process is, like I mentioned, it's to kill off all of that bacteria that can form in the food in the jar. So that's what the processing does. It also helps to seal the actual lid to the glass jar. So if you kind of look at, here, let me grab one of these. If you look at the bottom of this lid, it has that like Band-Aid colored ring, and that's like rubber. And so what the processing part does in the canner is actually makes that seal to the glass jar so that it's airtight, make sure no bacteria can get in or out, and keeps it good at the like on our shelves for up to a year or longer. So that's what the like basic science is behind the canning process. Each recipe that you use is going to have a different processing time. That's another really important part to remember, that you shouldn't be changing processing times. Stick to whatever recipe you're using because that has been tested for that specific like jar size and those ratios. So never change, just to review, don't change the ratios of acidity, don't change your jar size, and don't change your processing times for a recipe. Cool. So in terms of processing times also, as you can see, like I've turned this on, like the heat on, but it's not boiling yet. And the processing time for this is going to be 15 minutes. We won't start counting those 15 minutes until we're at a full boil. So right now I'm not counting the 15 minutes. Once we start to see those bubbles come up and that pressure is formed inside of the canner, then we'll put on a timer for 15 minutes. Cool. Any questions, Rose?
Not yet, my friend, but I did have one comment from Rachel, and she said processing time is also dependent on altitude.
Yes, that is a great thing to bring up. Yes, thank you, Rachel, Rachel, for sharing that. That is super important when you're looking for recipes, whether that's online or in a cookbook. Make sure that you're checking that it's written for the like sea level or altitude that you're at, because the processing times will vary depending on where you are. So thank you for sharing that. Cool. So if we're good on the pickles, I'm going to move on to our little jam recipe now. Does that sound good? I also see a question here. Let me see. Would it be better to wait for the water to boil before adding the jars? So you could do that. My water is already quite hot because I just processed or just sterilized those jars a few minutes ago. So it will get up to a boil pretty quickly. But yeah, if you wanted to kind of like pre-boil it or keep the water simmering, you could do that too. Let's see. Do you keep on high boil for all 15 minutes? Yeah, I'm gonna keep it on like a high, like a rolling boil there. Not like massive bubbles, but like a nice you can see it. You know, you don't want just like a simmer. Will you boil the jar for 15? Yeah, so that's two of the same question. Does that answer everyone's question? So you do want it to be like at a boil the whole time. And it's great to use a pot with a glass lid because then you can actually see it. If you buy like an actual canner, a lot of them have like a pressure gauge also, which will tell you when it's at pressure. So that can be quite helpful as well. Awesome. So we are going to get our jam started over at the stove.
Maybe one more question, my friend. Gloria is really interested in understanding how the bubble thing works. When you tap the jar to get rid of the bubbles, how does that help?
Yeah, so if you have too many air bubbles in there, it can mess up that rubber seal that I mentioned. So if there's too many air bubbles trying to escape, then we won't be able to get a proper seal on the jar. The instrument, I'll show you when we're filling the jam jars, how you can use this instead of just doing the tap. Does that sound good, Gloria? Okay, great. Perfect. All right, so let's head over to the stove to get our jam started. So I'm using this big Dutch oven that I have. You want to be using a non-reactive pot when you are making jams because you don't want any kind of like tinny taste in your jam. So this is like an enameled cast iron. It's perfect. We're making peach jam, like I mentioned. So I've already gone ahead and chopped up my peaches. If you can see here, I diced them. They're looking a little bit liquidy just because I threw a little bit of lemon juice on them earlier after I diced them to keep them from kind of browning while they sat out and oxidized. In terms of preparing the peaches, I didn't have time to show you all this, but what I did was I kind of like boiled and shocked the peaches. It's one of my favorite ways to quickly peel a peach. So basically just get a big pot of water going. Once it's at a boil, throw your peaches right in there, let them sit in the boiling water for a minute, then take them out and transfer them to ice cold water, like an ice water bath right after. And then the skins will just kind of like slip right off. So I've done that. I've used about 4 pounds of peaches before I diced and pitted them. What I've ended up with now is about, I believe it was 1,300 grams. So about almost like 3 pounds-ish, but it was 1,300 grams. I see a question. Oh, can folks not see the jam pot?
If I make it into a gallery, does that help with folks? Can you see 3 things? Just want to double check. How's everybody doing? You can see it. Yes, I can see all 3. Okay, amazing. There we go. Okay,
it might be if someone's like on a phone or something. All right, so like I said, I've got about 1,250 grams of diced peaches here. Like I mentioned earlier, weighing ingredients when making a jam can be really, really helpful. Because like a basic I'm going to give you a basic fruit jam ratio that you can use for most fruits. And those are going to be in weights. So I do suggest using a scale if you can. So I'm going to go ahead and add my diced peaches right into my pot here. Beautiful. And so they smell so good. All right. Then, like I mentioned, weight is really important. So I've weighed out my sugar. So for the amount of fruit that you're using, you want to be using between 30 and 50% of that weight in sugar and adding that to your jam. So like I mentioned, I had about 1,250 grams of peaches here. So I'm using, I believe, 600 grams of sugar is what I weighed out. So you're going to go ahead and throw that right in there as well. Right, give that a stir. Alrighty. Next, I'm going to add my lemon juice. So lemon juice, the basic kind of fruit jam recipe is for every 1.2 kilograms of fruit, you're going to use the juice of 1 lemon or 3 tablespoons of lemon juice. So I've got 3 tablespoons of lemon juice here that I'm going to add into my peaches and my sugar. Perfect. So that is like our basic jam ingredients and ratios that we're looking at. Okay, now I'm gonna add in my spices. Again, with this, it's just like the pickles, adding spices in isn't gonna change the acidity level. So you can kind of play around with the spices based on your own personal taste and preferences. I'm gonna add in a little bit of ginger. I want kind of like a warming peach jam, you know, for like when I open this in the winter, 4 months from now here in Toronto, where we get pretty cold winters. It can feel like a hug from the inside out, you know? All right, so I've got my ginger. I'm gonna add a little bit of nutmeg as well.
I had a question in the chat, Jade. Could they use alternative sweeteners like honey or cane sugar, perhaps?
So you could definitely find a specific recipe for jam using alternative sweeteners, depending on like what it is that you're looking for. I wouldn't suggest substituting a sweetener though in a recipe that's been tested. So you can definitely look for like low sugar jams or ones using like a natural sweetener like honey or agave or whatever it is that you're looking for, but make sure that you find a recipe written for that specifically. I'm gonna go ahead and add in a cinnamon stick as well. So I've got it nice and spiced up. Give that a stir. And I don't know if you can see over here, but we've got our bubbles going in my pot. So I'm gonna start my timer for 15 minutes in terms of processing my pickles. Right, timer. Perfect. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and turn the heat on my jam. And what we're doing is bringing that up to a boil. Once we bring it up to a boil, then we're going to be adding our pectin in. So pectin is an ingredient that's used in a lot of fruit jam recipes. Not every fruit jam will use pectin because there is pectin naturally present in many, many fruits. It's like a fiber that's in the fruit and it helps the jam to actually like thicken up and set. We could make this like a no pectin recipe. The only thing is that we would need to actually boil our jam for a lot longer to reduce it, to bring that natural pectin out. So like instead of taking 5 minutes, this jam recipe might take like an hour or two if we don't add the pectin in. Because I want to like keep the amount of volume I have and I don't want to spend the next 2 hours watching the stove, I'm going to go ahead and add pectin in to thicken it up right away. And you can actually like look up what fruits are high pectin and what fruits are low pectin, and that will give you a better idea of what jams you might need to add pectin into or what jams you don't need to.
Nice. We have a comment from Rachel here, and she said that use jarred lemon juice because each lemon doesn't have the same amount of citric acid. Any thoughts around that, Jade?
Yeah, that's a good tip for sure. I like to use fresh lemon juice when I'm doing a fridge jam, but when I'm doing canning, I'll use jarred lemon juice or like a bottle of lemon juice because yeah, it does vary in terms of like how much juice is in the lemon and then also the acidity of the lemon as well. I see it will reduce a lot if you cook to achieve the pectin. Yeah, absolutely. So we would lose a lot of the volume of our jam if we were gonna like cook it through to get that natural pectin to come out. So instead, we want to keep all of this delicious peach goodness. So we are just going to add our pectin right in there in a couple of minutes. I'm going to be using liquid pectin today. You could also use like pectin crystals. It just depends on what's available near you. But I'm just going to use 1 packet of it for this recipe. Okay. Can you explain again how to know how much lemon juice to use? Yeah, so for 1.2 kilograms of fruit, you're going to use 3 tablespoons of lemon juice, or the juice of 1 lemon, basically. I'll send the recipe out written so you do have the exact ratios, but that's kind of how you know. So for every 1.2, you're using 3 tablespoons and 30 to 50% of the weight in terms of sugar. Rochelle says, do you prefer liquid or crystals? I personally prefer crystals. For some reason, it's like sold out here, so I can't find it, so I'm using liquid. I don't think there's a huge difference, but I don't know for sure because I don't really use the liquid one a lot. So we'll see. Hopefully everything goes well right now. Alrighty. So
That looks so delicious, Jade. The color is beautiful.
yeah, it's gorgeous. These peaches are so perfectly ripe. I'm so excited. I love peach jam so much. It's one of the fruits that I actually like prefer in jam form over just eating them like fresh. Same with pears. Peaches and pears I love in jams.
Well, there you go, folks. If you want to send a gift to Jade, peaches and jam.
Why do you chop your fruit versus crushing? So I like to chop mine just because I like a chunkier jam. If you were making this jam, you could kind of like cut your peaches however you want to. If you want to do sliced peaches, you can do that. If you want to do crushed, like so it's like kind of less rustic, I guess, you could do that as well. You could puree it too if you wanted. All of those would work perfectly fine. I just like to have like the little cubes, especially for when I'm eating it with like ice cream or something like that. Why do jams require so much sugar? That's a good question. So not all jams require so much sugar, but it does help with the setting and making it that kind of like nice consistency that we're looking for. And obviously also jams are pretty sweet generally, so the sugar does help with that. But you can find like low sugar jam recipes. They just have like a bit of a different process in terms of like getting that consistency right. Wondering why you used a cinnamon stick rather than grated cinnamon? No particular reason, just like a matter of preference. I won't put the sticks into the jars, if that makes sense. I'm just gonna like kind of leave it in there to get the flavor and then I'll take it out after. Alrighty, so it looks like I'm almost at a boil here with my peaches. You'll see it start to kind of like foam, and that's when you know it's starting to get to that nice boil. You can always be skimming the foam off of the top of your jam. That's helpful to do. Sometimes folks will add like a little pat of butter into jam to avoid the foaming, which can be really helpful. I just don't have any butter here, so I won't be doing that. Right. This is almost out of boil.
Besides peach jam, Jade, is there any other go-to jam recipes for you?
I love pear jam.
Ooh.
I usually make that every fall. I think we made pear jam actually when you came to BCCF. Love a pear jam. I love a hot pepper jelly also. That's like one of my favorite things to can is a hot pepper jelly. My grandma and I will grow like Scotch bonnets every year and then make it into like a really spicy jelly that you can have with like some brie on like some bread, and it's so good. It's my favorite.
That sounds delicious. Okay, next time we hang out, I want that recipe.
Totally. Okay, I see a question here in the chat. Made one batch solidified and one batch did not follow the same recipe. Any thoughts as why that might be? So it was a different box of pectin. I don't have like the exact answer to that. I think it could be, was it in the same pot that you did it? Sometimes like the size and the width of your pot that like will also affect how quickly your jam will set as well, because like if it's wider and shallower, then it'll boil out quicker. No, different pots. Yeah, so the size of the pot and the shape of your pot can alter that. The pectin itself, like depending on like the brand, sometimes they need like a little bit longer. Like most recipes will say a minute, but it kind of like, you never really know. If you put a pat of butter in the jam and jar it, would it spoil faster on the shelf? No, that wouldn't alter that. A lot of jam recipes call for that butter, and you can still keep them on the shelf for a year. All right, so we've got our peaches at a nice boil here. So I'm gonna go ahead and add my pectin in. So what you're gonna do when you add your pectin in is start stirring kind of right away once you've added that in there. and you want it to get to a rolling boil and boil it out for about a minute. So let's do that. And you want to be kind of stirring it constantly when we're doing this, all right? So, and again, you're not going to like actually start that 1 minute timer until we're back up to a rolling boil, right? So we were boiling before, we added our pectin and it kind of slowed it down for a sec. We're going to get back up in a minute. Once we're there, then we're going to start timing for a minute. I'm starting to see some bubbles showing up here. That's great. Okay, when stirring, do you need to keep it from foaming? So the stirring will help with the foaming a little bit. You can always be like, you can stir and then you can skim that foam off the top and throw it out if you want. I know some people actually keep the foam as well. I don't know what they do with it, but I do know there are uses for the foam. But you just want to be stirring constantly just to make sure that pectin's getting evenly distributed and we're not burning our jam, obviously. I see, can rubber sealed lids be used more than once? No, they cannot. So basically your jar can be reused, the actual like rims can be reused, but the lids cannot be reused for canning. That like elastic will only seal one time. So we need to make sure we're not reusing those. You can keep them to like, you know, like I store stuff in mason jars all the time. So you can definitely like keep lids and use them for other things. But for canning, again, you can't use them. All right, so we're getting to a nice boil here. So I'm gonna start stirring and I will look at my timer and count down a minute here. And I can actually like feel it as I'm stirring, starting to thicken up, which is fantastic. Now, if you're like a really scientific canner, you could be measuring the temperature of your jam to see when it's set. There is a specific temperature that you're looking for jam consistency that I can't remember off of the top of my head, but you could easily find that like with a quick Google search. The way I like to do it is just by testing it on a cold plate. So what you can do at the beginning of a canning process, once you start cooking or like before you start cooking your jam rather, is just stick a like plate that's heat proof or like cold proof into the freezer and just kind of let it hang out there until you're ready to test your jam. When you are, what you're going to do is just take a dollop of the jam, throw it onto that really cold freezer plate and see if it sets on that. If it does, then you know your jam is ready to go. All right, we've got the temperature in the chat. Thank you for sharing that. I can't see who it is, but I appreciate it. And then there's also like a temperature for jellies because you want the jelly to like be a little bit more set. So there's 2 different temperatures that you'd be looking for. I rarely use that personally. Alrighty, let's see what we're doing here. So I have a feeling that this liquid pectin is going to need a little bit more than a minute. So I'm going to give it a second minute. Because you can kind of like tell as you're stirring the jam if it's ready or not. I can tell right now that it is not. So just going to give it a little bit more time to get where it needs to be.
I had a question in the chat, Jade. What are how long do the pickles and the jam last in the pantry?
So they'll last for like at peak quality for a year. You could keep them a bit longer. The quality might start to kind of fade after that, just because like obviously sitting in a liquid, like the texture is going to change of things and like the taste might change a little bit. But a year, up to a year is like, I would say a good go-to.
Nice. And I have a question from Rachel. Do you find that the water content of fruit affects the setting?
Yeah, definitely. And there's like a lot of jam recipes I find that will call for you to like macerate the fruit ahead of time with sugar and lemon to like speed it up, to like get that liquid out and get that boiling. So I did do like a little bit of that before, but not a ton. So I can see like a lot of water coming out of it right now, which is probably why it's taking a little bit longer to get thickened up. But a lot of jam recipes will call for you to like macerate them overnight or something like that to speed up the actual cooking process.
Awesome.
All right, so let's see. Still looking pretty syrupy here, so give it a little bit more time. I do have my plate in the fridge ready to go to test it though. So we'll get that out in just a minute. Do I prefer maceration? Not necessarily. I don't know if it really, I think it speeds up the actual process, but I don't think it changes like the flavor of it. I personally don't think that. I don't know if there's like a science behind it that maybe says differently, but I don't have like a preferred method personally. I think texture is a preference. I like it chunky, definitely. I'm a chunky jam person. Not everyone is. If you're starting with frozen fruit, would you recommend letting them thaw or colander to remove the extra liquid? I would say so. I would say like keep the liquid just in case you want to like add it in. But I would say get rid of some of that liquid for sure, depending on what fruit it is as well, right? Alrighty. So my timer is about to go off for my pickles, which is amazing. So I'm gonna turn that off. And all I'm gonna do is just turn the heat off and actually move. Sorry, let me move. I've got a lot of pans on my stove here. I'm just gonna move my canner off the heat and let it kind of chill out for 5 minutes before I take my pickles out of the canner. Alrighty. So I'm gonna go ahead and test my jam now to see where we're at. So I'm gonna grab that plate out of my freezer. Okay, so I've got my nice cold plate here. You can see the like coolness coming off of it because my apartment is hot. Alrighty, so got my cold plate. Gonna take a little bit of this jam and just drop it right onto the plate here. We're gonna give it a minute and see if it sets, all right? I have a feeling that it needs a little bit more time. But who knows, I could be completely wrong. All right, so I can see that. So I'm gonna use my finger to push it up. You can see it does form a line, but you can see the jam starting to kind of like drip. We do want the line to be clean, so it's definitely getting there. But what you should be seeing is like the jam starting to actually wrinkle when you push it with your finger. So here we're not getting a wrinkle, it's still pretty liquidy. So we're gonna give it another minute or so just to get to that consistency we want. It does taste really good though. So why did I do that? Why does it need the canner off the heat for 5 minutes? So you could like technically take it right out if you wanted. I just don't because there's like a lot of steam that will be coming off of it right away if you were to like open it up and just grab the can out of there. So just for like safety reasons, let it kind of like chill out, like get a little bit less boiling for a minute before you stick your hand over the pot.
I also have a question here, Jade. Just wanting to know, where did you learn to can, my friend?
Oh, I just like learned from watching people do it. I mean, I didn't like go to school I didn't go to culinary school or anything like that. My background is in social work, like you mentioned earlier, so we definitely didn't learn canning in social work school. But my partner went to culinary school and taught me a lot, and then I had some my grandma knows how to can and some other folks in my family. So just kind of like learning through doing really and watching.
I learned that. I love that. I feel like that's the traditional way of teaching in many, many ways. Yeah.
Great. So our jam is almost there. I can feel it getting nice and thick. I will show you though how to take our pickles out of the canner while that jam kind of finishes up. So you are going to need like a wooden cutting board nearby when you take your jars out, because you don't want to be putting a really hot jar onto a counter that is not like heat resistant. So I'm just going to use this little wooden cutting board I have here. Set it over here. Let me show you. So there's our canner. Take this lid off. I'm also going to keep stirring my jam here, so I'm multitasking. Right, let me, I've misplaced my jar lifter. There's too much stuff here. Okay, because I have another set. All right, so again, using the jar lifter, you're just gonna grab the jar, get any kind of water off the top there, and set it onto your cutting board. So here is my jar, beautiful. So we might get lucky and hear a pop, let's see. Actually, you probably won't be able to hear it because I have headphones on. But basically, the way that you can test a jar to make sure it has properly set is by listening for a pop. Oh, okay, it just popped. You couldn't hear it, but it did pop. So you'll hear this like pop sound, and then you'll actually see the lid of the jar go concave. So when you take it out of the hot water canner, you're probably going to see that it has a little kind of like air bubble at the top. And then when it seals properly, it pops and it goes inwards. So you want it to look like this part of a spoon inwards instead of like this. If it doesn't pop by itself, what you can do is just go ahead and like actually push it in. If it stays in, then it's sealed and you're good to go. If your lid keeps popping up, it is not sealed. Something went wrong during the canning process, which is totally okay. It happens a lot. If that happens, you don't have to throw it out. You can just store it in the fridge for a couple of weeks and eat it within like the amount of time that you would eat it if you hadn't canned it. Do you know what I mean? So if you make like a fridge jam, you leave it for a couple of weeks, you could do that. You can also throw it in the freezer if your jar is freezer safe. Does anyone have any questions about that sealing process?
No, but lots of people are commenting on the chat that they love that sound. So satisfying, said Liz.
So true. All right, so our jam is just about ready. I'm going to grab my plate again to quickly test it. And then we'll end with just showing you how to pack the jars of jam. I won't obviously like stick around so you can watch it boil for 10 minutes. But if folks have any questions at this point, definitely feel free to ask them now as we're kind of in the last few steps here.
Can you freeze pickles, Jade?
No, so you wouldn't want to freeze pickles. That would like, because freezing does change the texture of something, of a food. You could definitely freeze a jam though.
There you go. And where can they get tested recipes? Like, do you have recommendations of where they can find tried and true recipes?
Like the actual like jar brands have a lot, like Bernardin or like Ball. There's lots of like cookbooks too that have tons and tons of them. There's like Cooking in Jars or something like that. I can't remember what it's called. But anything where it's like comes from a reputable source is what you're looking for. There's some blogs that might have tested ones, but I would suggest going to something that's like a little bit more like institutional, because you know that they've got like the science back behind it. There's a lot of actually like universities that will have like canning guides online as well that will have recipes in them. I see someone asked a question about, is it all right to place the jar directly on the bottom of the pan? No, so you want to make sure you always have a rack at the bottom of your pot when you are canning. So whether that's like an actual canning rack or you're using a baking rack or tin foil, or like I mentioned, these guys kind of tied together, any of those work, but you just want to make sure they are lifted off of the bottom of the pan there.
Someone asked also, Jade, where can they find your handy dandy kit, your canning kit? Where can they find that? Is that available?
Yeah, so I think, unfortunately, I bought mine on Amazon, which I'm not super proud of, but I did need it kind of like quickly. So I got on Amazon. You get like any kind of like big box store, really. I know like Walmart has them, Home Hardware. Lots of cooking stores will have them too. So if you're like a local cooking store in your neighborhood, that would be awesome too. But they're pretty easily accessible, especially at this time of year. I think there's lots of places selling them because it is harvest season. So folks are looking to can. One tip I do have also is that this time of year, mason jars sell out, at least here in Toronto, really quickly. So kind of get your hands on mason jars as quickly as you can around harvest season, because last year I couldn't find any, and I couldn't like do any canning until much later in the season because they were just gone.
Rachel had a comment on the thing. She said, Canadian Tire. So for those who are in Canada, good
Awesome.
old Canadian Tire.
Alrighty, so let's see here. Actually, I know I said I'm not a scientific canner, but I am just gonna grab my thermometer and check the temperature of my jam here. We said 220, right? In the chat?
Yeah, 220 Fahrenheit.
Awesome. Let's do this because I did forget to put the plate back in the freezer, so I can't test it again. Alrighty. Let's see what we're at here. The temperature is climbing. Sorry, my thermometer is quite slow. We're currently at 201 and going up, so I do have a feeling that it is about ready.
What's it smell like, Jade? Is it smelling real good?
Oh yeah, it smells like fall. It smells great.
Awesome. Allison had a tip on the chat and she said there's an app called Flip and it has sales that they show. And you could search for mason jars, canning or canning sets. There you go, folks. Check out Flip.
Amazing.
Maybe you'll be able to get some really good equipment there.
Perfect. All right, so it looks like we are at temperature. Amazing. So I'm going to quickly show you how to pack the jam into our can here, and then we'll be pretty much done. And I see a question about, will the peach jam recipe be available? Absolutely. I've got a nice little PDF that we'll send out with both of those recipes, as well as like kind of all the stuff we covered today. So you can always look back and check there if need be. Okay, so let me do a little move over here real quick. So we've got our nice little jar set up. So the peach jam we're doing in 1/2 pint jars. So that's 250 milliliters. It should make about 6. It might actually make more, to be honest, because there's quite a lot of, actually, maybe not. I don't know. I'm so bad at kind of like guessing based on looking at the pot. So I am just gonna grab a little trivet here to protect my island. Then turn the stove off and bring my jam pot right here. Okay, amazing, nice and bubbling, it looks great. I'm gonna give this a wash real quick so we don't get vinegar in our jam. And if there's any kind of like last questions, feel free to ask them now. I know we're pretty much at time, so I won't keep y'all longer. Just curious, why would you can your jam instead of just freezing it? So for me, I don't have a ton of like freezer and fridge space. So like being able to can stuff and leave it on the shelf is really helpful. It stays longer as well, right? Like a year, it's a long time. I guess if you freeze it, it could stay for 6 months or something like that. But yeah, so like space saving and also just like length of time. And it's also like freezer jam is gonna have a bit of a different texture as well. So this kind of like keeps it a more traditional jam texture, you know what I mean? Alrighty, so I've got my funnel in my jar here. Gonna grab a ladle and do the same thing, just ladle it right into the jar. And we're looking again for that inch to ½ inch of headspace here, making sure that we're leaving space for the jar to be able to seal properly in the bass. Right. So that's in there. For whoever it was that was asking questions about the bubble remover, I'm going to use it now. So I've got my bubble remover nice and clean. You're just going to use this end and slide it into the sides and just kind of go up and down around the sides of your jam here. So this is actually just helping us to get rid of any air bubbles that might kind of be laying low at the bottom of the jar here, making sure we're getting them all out. Beautiful. Put that in there. So let me, oh, I can't really lift it because it's hot. Grab a towel here to show you. So here, again, we've got that headspace at the top, beautiful color, you can see. And the last thing we're gonna do before we put the lid on and process it is again, just clean the mouth of that jar with a paper towel. With jams, it's especially important because it's so sticky and there's lots of food particles that can get caught up there and cause rust and mess up our seal. So give that a good wipe. And then you're gonna go ahead and follow the exact same process. So use your lid lifter to grab your lid out of there, place it on top, use a finger to hold that down, grab a rim, fingertip tight, and now that's ready to go into the hot water bath to process. The peach jam is a bit different than the pickles because we're processing for 10 minutes instead of 15. But again, that will be in the PDF that we do send out. In terms of the processing process though, it's the exact same. So we just throw it back in the canner, bring it to a boil. Once it's at that boil, 10 minutes, good to go.
Awesome. Oh my God. Round of applause to Jade, my friends. That was amazing. 2 recipes, delicious recipes. In the chat, let me know, everyone, which one was your favorite? If you could pick a favorite, which recipe are you going to try first? The jam or the pickle? Trisha says jam. Allison says jam. I'm actually going to try the pickle. I think that's going to be a really good pickle. Definitely, says Bonnie. I love it. There you go. Good stuff. So thank you so much, Jade, for amazing. That was just amazing. And I think I learned so much just from watching you do this again, my friend, and just learning all the little nitty-gritty techniques that you have. So absolutely, it was a blast. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for attending. I hope it was helpful.
Definitely. So before everybody pushes off today, I do want to share one more thing. I'm going to share my screen really quick. And all right, so we promised in the event description that you would get a chance to win a gift card from us. So we have 2 gift cards from Whole Foods Market up for grabs. So before the end of the week, we will draw one winner from folks who attended yesterday for day 1 and another winner from the people that attended today. So please keep an eye out for an email if you've won one of our 150 Whole Foods Market gift card. Also, if you want to support FoodShare, please check out their website and give them some love on Instagram and Twitter. So their information, I'm actually going to pop it in the chat. So feel free to check out the amazing stuff that FoodShare is doing in the chat. So if you have any questions or you want to get a hold of Jade for more preservation, eating, nutrition, all of that good stuff, She is fantastic, as you have seen. So once again, we do need to leave you. It breaks my heart every time we have to finish one of these preservation workshops. It's so darn good. But we want to thank Jade for just being a badass in the kitchen and just an amazing preservation person. So thank you so much, Jade. And another huge shout out to Whole Foods Market for making tonight's event a possibility. So thank you very much. So from my team to your team and family, on behalf of Jade and the FoodShare team, thank you so much, everybody, for hanging out for Let's Preserve. We'll see you in the next training. Have a great evening, everybody. Bye.